one of the things I like to do is ask experts, people like Paul Farmer and Bruce Walker and Max Essex and others at Harvard who were my colleagues at the time, is it really possible to treat people with AIDS in a low-income setting, in an impoverished setting? And they said, sure, why not? And I said, well, is there something about the nutrition or the climate or the rest of the conditions in Africa that would make that impossible? They said, no. So, well, why aren't we doing it? I said, well, there's absolutely no good medical reason. And I was lucky to have such wonderful colleagues, and the four of us started a petition, which is the first time Harvard professors ever agreed on anything, but we signed a petition for about 140 faculty at the Harvard Medical School of Public Health that it would be absolutely normal to treat people with HIV infection in Africa, that this could be done in a very low-cost manner. And we started putting some numbers to it, and I took it to Kofi Annan, who is, of course, another hero of our age, and he said, of course we're going to do this, of course we have to push this. And yet the official reaction was very hostile. Oh, no, you can't do this, you can't, this is too expensive, this is too hard, whatever the arguments that could be made. And that was 2001. We still didn't have one human being on treatment, and millions died, and the medicine's there to keep them alive, and not one. And I just mention this because it shows not only how far we've come, but it shows how this world can completely turn its eyes away from the most basic realities and leave millions to suffer and die, and do it without seemingly blinking or batting an eyelash. That's how possible it is. The story gets, for me, even more interesting. Kofi said, we're going to do it, and he launched the proposal for the Global Fund at a meeting in Abuja, Nigeria, in the spring of 2001. And there he was. I never understood it, frankly, to this moment. There he was with George Bush in the Rose Garden the next month, with President Bush saying, we're going to join the Global Fund. Now, in the meantime, I had been to the White House a couple of times. I was not probably their most beloved economist, for a number of reasons. But I briefed Condoleezza Rice on 2 occasions in February 2001 about the need for a U.S. government program. And she was very attentive, and there was a large group at the White House listening. And at the end of the second meeting, a former student of mine, Larry Lindsay, who was the head of the National Economic Council, put his arm around me and escorted me out the West Wing of the White House and said, Jeff, that was a very good try, but you don't stand a chance. There is no way this administration is going to get behind a $3 billion a year program for AIDS. It's just impossible. I said I understood, but that this was something that really needed to be done. If I could fast forward about 8 months, I was driving home from work, and I got a call, and it was Bono. That wasn't all that frequent. Anyway, Bono said, Jeff, what are you doing? And I said, I'm driving home. He said, I think you better pull over. I said, okay. So I pulled over. I remember the parking lot to this moment that I pulled into. I said, Bono, what's up? And he said, Jesse Helms just left me. I said, what? He said, yeah, we were just reading scriptures together. And he called me over and he blessed me. And he called the White House. And he said, you take good care of this boy. He's doing God's work. And this was not a political alliance I expected. I won't elaborate. It's not one I could have ever pulled off or imagined. But the fact of the matter is that Jesse Helms and Franklin Graham and many others whom I had nothing to do with politically for my whole career became absolutely the champions of this because it was the right thing to do, and it was the moral thing to do, and it was something that sometimes we don't even imagine is in our politics, but it becomes a force at times that just can't be imagined. And it was not so long after that I was sitting home and also received an interesting phone call. There was Kofi on the line. I said, Kofi, what are you doing? I now know that's a good thing. When I was sitting here, he said, you better turn on the television for the State of the Union. There's going to be an interesting announcement. And that was President Bush's announcement of PEPFAR. And that was a $3 billion program originally, and it has since expanded. And it's something that you made possible by making sure that decency remains part of our social reality and our political reality. We do things because they're the right thing to do, because it's not right to leave millions of people to die for no good reason. And there was no good reason. Unimaginable. There is never a good reason. And yet we're perfectly capable of doing this in our systems and in our complexity and in our excuses and in our blindness. And yet we're also capable of surmounting this. And I don't think there's a more important group in our country than you for surmounting this. I really am not saying that to flatter you. I'm saying that to keep you moving, because you got a lot of work to do. You are leaders of decency in our politics, the ones that say we better do the right thing. I'm not here, Congressman, because I'm a lobbyist. I'm not here, Congressman, because I'm representing a particular interest group. I'm not here, in the case of most of us, because I'm rich or that I can bring large blocks of votes to you. I'm here because I'm an American who believes in decency and believes that what goes around comes around, and if we're decent to others, they'll be decent to us too. We'll have a safer world. We'll have a more pleasant world. We'll have a world that is healthier for our children and a place where they can grow up. And God knows we need it. And that kind of politics can work. And the politics, unfortunately, of our professional pollsters and focus group advocates and campaign financiers is a very different kind of politics. It's the politics of money and influence, and it's turning America off very badly. We're kind of in a broken politics, not because the politicians don't do their professional job. They become more and more professional politicians and less people. And they have forgotten that they're there just as representatives of people, of Americans who want a normal and decent life in this country. And things have gotten awfully confused on that point. But the triumph that we had in getting the Global Fund and getting PEPFAR and getting the President's Malaria Initiative, and I say we because I know it's literally we, and how many times was Joanne Carter on the line saying, Jeff, can you do this because results has this, and we've accomplished this, and so forth, and the things that you people have done have been absolutely world-changing. But we have to keep doing it. And if I could bring the story up a few years, it's a tough story because we've made a lot of progress, but we haven't finish the job. And the job has gotten harder in the last 3 years. The 2000s were kind of breakthrough, and I didn't fully expect it, and I couldn't have seen it come the way that it did. But in the area of public health, from the year 2000 to around 2009, there was an increase of global funding from all sorts and to all sorts of organizations that amounted to probably $15 to $20 billion per year by the end of the decade. And the thing that we proved with that money is that if you take the resources and you invest them in a scientific and evidence-based manner, there are no other obstacles because there are enough dedicated people around that will get the job done. So millions are being saved from death from HIV. Malaria, almost miraculously, is down by about 40% in sub-Saharan Africa from its peak in 2004. And I say that it's a bit of a miracle because that disease is so relentless. There are so many damn mosquitoes out there, and they are able to transmit this disease with such force that getting a break in that disease in the region of the world that's most impacted takes a lot of effort and a lot of determination, and yet it is as clear as can be that we have turned a corner on malaria through the Global Fund and the President's Malaria Initiative and the World Bank commitments afterwards. That's a great breakthrough. We're seeing child mortality come down. We're seeing maternal mortality come down by half. Childbirth is becoming safer, though it's still far too deadly in many places, poor places in the world. But it has become safer through investments in emergency obstetrical care and antenatal visits and community health workers advising mothers and skilled birth attendants. There's been a big change. I thought that we were on a path where this progress was bound to continue. But we have absolutely reached a crossroads now. And it's a surprising kind of crossroads, because while I wouldn't have guessed that the Bush administration would be the champion of the scale-up, in all honesty, I would not have guessed that the Obama administration would have been the one to let things tail off the way that they have. We're just treading water right now. We've stopped the forward advance. Yes, we had the financial crisis in 2008, but I think we also had too many professional politicians say, no, that's not good for us. We got to focus on something else. That was their administration. We got to do something different. And I don't think we've seen the kind of determination that we need to finish this job. When you look at what's happened to the funding and to the programs on the ground, they reached their peak in 2009. And since 2009, we've been more or less flat globally on development aid for health, even though we knew during this period that we were only on a path to achieve success. We had not gotten to the levels that we needed. And so we have hit a kind of ceiling, and we need to break through. Because the path that we're on will not work, and it will not even hold. Right now, we know that the gap in financing of what's needed to win the battle against AIDS and the financing we have available is short $5 to $10 billion a year. And we know that the United States has waved its hands, asked for delays, said, yes, we're going to do it, but maybe we won't quite do it. It's only because of you pushing that we've not had backsliding. In other countries, the backsliding has been much more significant, but we haven't had the forward progress that we need. We have a lot of self-congratulations by the politicians. Look at how much has been achieved. But it's our job to look beyond that. Yes, of course, everything that I said is a matter of achievement. But today's politicians have to own up to tomorrow's achievement, not to the achievement of the last decade. Here's the thing we know. If we make the investments, the job gets done. We put aside all the excuses, all the phony arguments, all the can't-dos, and show that they were simply wrong or even lies. We once upon a time had a head of USAID who said Africans can't tell time, therefore they can't take their medicines. If you can imagine. And that person survived in his job, as you can imagine, which should not have survived even a moment after such a stupidity. But we proved all of that wrong. The programs work. They're just needing resources to finish the job. And I can see on the ground each month when I visit villages in Africa how the work is proceeding and how much more can be accomplished. I'll just give you one quick illustration. Malaria is down by about 40%, but it would be possible to end malaria deaths within the next 3 or 4 years, saving almost another 1 million lives per year. Why? Because during this past decade, not only has there been more investment in malaria control, but the technologies have gotten better and better. 10 years ago, a mother would carry her child 5 to 10 miles to try to reach a clinic, praying that there would be a lab and somebody with a microscope that could diagnose the malaria. Today, a community health worker carries a little plastic kit that in 15 minutes at the household itself with 1 drop of blood can give an even better diagnosis of whether this is malaria or not. It costs almost nothing, it is reliable, and it allows for treatment right at the home. The medicines are better, the diagnostics are better, the anti-malaria vet nets are better. The idea of community workers delivering malaria control right in the communities has progressed dramatically. The cell phones are better. 10 years ago, there weren't even phones in any of the villages that I went to. Now they're everywhere. And this gives the ability to call for help. It gives the ability to contact a health worker. It gives the ability to make sure that medicine is available. There's no excuse, in other words, for not finishing the job. And last year, I and my colleagues and with Joanne and with health ministers around Africa, we were getting ready for round 11 of the Global Fund to submit significant packages for scaling up community health workers who could be the frontline army to get the job done. And then what happened? The Global Fund suspended round 11. And we've not had a new funding round of the Global Fund for well over a year. And there isn't one in prospect for another 6 months. This is shameful. I hold the administration heavily responsible for this, because we should never have gone for a period of 2 years without new funding rounds to allow the continuing advance of these programs. And the programs were working, and the excuses that there was corruption were absurd, because what they found was that there was indeed corruption, as this town ought to know. It's everywhere, but the fund controls it and audits and takes measures. And that's why, among other reasons, it's such an effective institution. But it was used as an excuse, basically, to stop programming. And even now, we have huge risks with that organization, whether it's going to get back on its feet to fulfill the mandate and the obligations that the world has put on it. One of the most beautiful things about the Global Fund, as Joanne and I have talked about many times over the last decade, is that it's an open bidding process. It's not the politicians saying we're going to give to this country but not to that country. It's saying if you have a valid health program that can pass expert vetting, you will be funded. And now even that's a threat right now, as too many people are trying to bob and weave and cut budgets, and this horrible expression that I heard yesterday used again, to do more with less. That's absurd, I told them, because I was asked by a UNICEF official, how do we do more with less, Professor Sachs? I said, that is a scam. We need to do more with more. So, since 2009, we're flat. And the budgets of our governments are in trouble. Why? Because the tax havens, the places where Mr. Romney goes to visit his money, I guess, and so many others, it's on both sides of the aisle, have become richer and richer. 2 days ago, there was a story in The Guardian, take a look at it, we'll hear more about it, that the current best estimate is that the tax havens have about $20 trillion in them now of wealth that's hidden. Take 1 penny out of 100 of that, and you've got $2 billion a year. Take 1% of that, mostly ill-gotten and tax-evaded money, and you've got out of $20 trillion, $200 billion a year, more than we pay for all the development aid in the world. And that's money of a few thousand people. So what's happened is that we have turned our budgets and our tax systems over to the service of the rich, and the politicians more and more are pleading, we don't have the money to finance these things. So the poor people just have to do more with less. And we're going to tell them that we're going to have less of those kinds of politicians in the future. So we're in a big fight and in a big battle, and the battle is nothing less than the battle for basic decency in our society and health and survival around the world, and a safe environment for ourselves and for our children and for the future of the planet. And all of these battles of decency and ethics and morality and honest financing and paying your taxes and helping impoverished people to stay alive and raise their children and not destroying the planet through climate change are all intertwined. These are all inevitably our cause together. And there is no escaping one or the other, because you pull the thread and it's all linked. The ethics and the politics and the budgets and the health and the physical environment of the planet and the future of our societies. In the last few months, I spent a lot of time in the Horn of Africa. That's Somalia, Ethiopia, northern Kenya, northern Uganda, places beset by one of the worst droughts of modern history. The evidence suggests that while this is partly the result of natural variation, what's called the La Nina phase in the Pacific, it's also the result of long-term climate change caused by us. And then last time, Chad, and a few weeks before that in Mali, which has been subjected to drought and now chaos that comes with hunger and disarray. A similar drought of extreme proportions hit the Sahel, which is the dryland part of West Africa. But actually, last week, I had to leave New York City to get out of the heat, so I went to tropical Africa where it was a little cooler. Because I left 100-degree heat in New York City and went to where it was only 91 degrees in N'Djamena, Chad. It was a little cooler. We were able to cool off for a few days. But obviously, we're wrecking our own country at the same time as our methods of using and producing energy are doing damage worldwide. We have in the United States, as you know, the worst drought in modern history. 26 states have been declared in drought emergency, the most ever. I was on email with my gurus, climate change gurus, yesterday, Jim Hansen, who many of you know, I think the world's the greatest climate scientist and also bravest. And another colleague of mine, Richard Seeger, and they were explaining to me that these droughts have their natural variation, also La Nina linked, but no doubt the higher temperatures and the long-term climate change are making these crises much, much more serious, much graver than they were before. And if you happen to be speculating in commodities, you'll know that food prices are soaring again, soybean prices and wheat prices, and you know that means misery for poor people. And it means difficulties for almost everybody, except the super rich, who somehow think that their children will live in a different climate, or that climate change stops at the gated community, or I don't know what they think exactly. But they don't quite get it. So I'm really thrilled that you are combining the fight against poverty and the fight against climate change in your mission. And I want to tell you how grateful I am for that, and how we need to put these together, because this is the interconnected reality of our time. Last month in Rio, and I'll stop here so that we can open for some discussion. Last month in Rio was the 20th anniversary of the Rio Earth Summit of 1992. So this was called Rio Plus 20. How many of you have heard about it, by the way? This is not a random group in America. How many of you did not hear about it, by the way? Fair enough, because I looked in our newspapers and I could find almost no coverage in our newspapers. This was just some incidental event that, for many newspapers, merited, page